This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
And this week we'll go through the core ideas about land market. And next week there will be no class because next week there is the university close day and also public holiday, which is the Anzac Day. So in 2 weeks' time, in week 9, we'll go through the key ideas about housing. And then we'll move on to land ownership issues with a focus on informality and the infrastructure provision. That will be pretty useful when you are dealing with developing countries. And in week 11, we'll expand our scope to a global cities and globalization. And then in week 12, we'll wrap up and we'll go through some key ideas about transport and the economy. So in week 12, at the end of the semester, you'll submit another written assignment, which will be the literature review. So your literature review can pick up one topic throughout the semester. So please pay attention to topic by topic every week. So if you find interesting, please further investigate that area with academic references. So after 1 hour lecture today, myself, the librarian will come over to give you a brief idea how to find references by using the library resources database. And then there will be a short presentation by Malha Ravalia. He gave a talk a couple of weeks ago about DCP, and he will talk about greenfield development. The topic that we'll go through today is urban land rent. If you have any urban economics textbook, this topic is more likely in the first section, which is very important and essential topic, and that will give you a pretty clear idea about the urban forms and land market, which is the fundamental to the urban economics topic. So we'll try to understand how the price of land is determined and understand von Thienen's model of land use and prices. Probably you came across this model because this is a very core concept in geography, and we'll explore a bid rent curve, which is a modern version of von Thienen's model, and we'll go through some ideas about land use and urban space structure. Land use is determined by firms, household, and the government, and the earlier version of ideas on land rent started by Ricardo. I'd like to address this example. You have 2 pieces of land. One has low fertility or low productivity for farming, and another piece of land has higher fertility or higher level of productivity. Which land should be more expensive? Absolutely, the land with high productivity. If you produce only 1 corn in your land, probably the land price is not as high as the land that can produce 3 corns at the same time, which is pretty obvious now. But in the late 19th centuries, this idea about price of land rent was not very clear. Ricardo proposed the idea that land varies in its natural endowment or advantages for the users, which refers to productivity or fertility of the land. In his concept, in his worldview, the land with high fertility or higher productivity should have higher land rent because it is more productive. People can earn more money. That is pretty straightforward. And this idea is related to von Tinen's isolated state, or his model that decide the land rent. So basic assumption is that land varies in location, but fertility is the same. In Ricardian land rent, fertility varies over the space. This land has more fertility, that land has less productivity. But in von Tinen's model, the basic assumption is that productivity is the same across the space, across the land. In the state, the productivity is the same, but the difference is transport cost. You need to produce your product, and then you need to transport to the central market areas. That requires transport cost. So, depending on your preference and depending on the transport cost, land uses can change. This is a very simplified version of diagram. For instance, dairy product can should have good access to the marketplace because it is easy to be rotten. So the dairy products like the places near the central marketplace. How about flower shops? Flowers. If you cut the flower, it starts withering. So it's good to be located close to the market area. So these retailers, these industries like the place where the marketplaces are near. But some industries like livestock and these industries don't need to be located just next to the marketplace because the transport cost is not that essential to that industry. So here, the von Tinen identified different curves depending on their transport need. The steep line shows their bid rent curve for for dairy products or some industries that should be located nearby the marketplace. But these flat graphs shows their willingness to pay for land rent for like farming and livestock. It is not necessary to be located to the central marketplace. So basic idea is the end users, land users are competing with each other. Those who have higher willingness to pay will take the land and use the land, which is pretty similar to your eBay auction. And I believe many of you have placed a bid on eBay and to purchase your items. Probably if you want to go to the eBay for the bid, you will have your maximum amount that you are willing to put a place there. If you have the highest willingness to pay, you will get the item. So the bid rent curve has the similar concept to this bidding process or the auction. When you go to auction to buy a property, probably you need to have a maximum amount that you are happy to pay. It is dependent on your budget and also your evaluation and valuation on the property and also your willingness to pay for that property. If you find that property is very good, your willingness to pay might be higher, but given the limited budget, but the property is not that good, your willingness to pay is not that high. So the key to decide the bid rent is your willingness to pay. So bid rent curve comes from your willingness to pay, and this is closely related to distance to the central place. At the beginning of this idea, the central place was the marketplace. So producers need to transport their items to the central marketplace. It needs transport cost. But now we can also relate this issue to the access to the key functions like train station and the CBD and the port and airport, because it is related to the transport cost. Here, the assumption is that resources are allocated on the basis of prices, cost, and profit. So if your profit margin is high, your willingness to pay for land is going to be high. It depends on the cost and profit and economic evaluation. And firms and households have preferences. They have different preferences. So their location choice will be different. And owners of land sell or let to the highest bidder. Their role is pretty simple. They just let the highest bidder to take their land, to use the land. And this is their role. So if someone gives more rent, the landowner is happy to give that land to that highest bidder. Then knowledge of the land is known to the public. So there's no hidden information that makes a perfect competition environment. And there's no government intervention in this earlier version. But if there is a government intervention, the bid rent should be different. So from the earlier version of this idea, suggested by von Thienen, William Alonso is a pretty important scholar to develop these bid rent curve ideas. This is about economics of location patterns and land rent. This is all about land rent and also location patterns and also spatial structure of the cities. And households and firms are willing to make bids for land at various locations. And the land use can be explained by comparing the bids made by different types of household and firms. So we'll go through these ideas. The prices of land can be regarded as being determined by demand only. This is pretty obvious when you think of the supply of land. The supply of land is generally fixed. So this is the basic supply curve. The horizontal axis is the quantity, while vertical axis is the price of the land rent. And let's compare the supply A and the supply B. When price is increased from P1 to P2, the quantity of supply increased from Q1 to Q0 to Q1 for supply B, for supply A. But for supply B, the quantity increased from Q0 to Q2, which is more larger than supply A. So supply B is more elastic to price changes. Once price changes, the quantity of supply increased more radically than supply A. So which we call the supply B is more elastic, while supply A is called inelastic. It is not elastic to price changes. The supply of land is very fixed. You can't make land, basically. But now, technically, you can make like man-made land for by filling in the seashores, so you can create the land. But this is pretty marginal. So it's not a major supply of land. But basically, let's assume the supply of land is fixed. So normally, the supply of land is very inelastic. If you draw the diagram or graph, the shape is likely this. No matter what happens to the price, the supply of land, the quantity of land is fixed at here, very inelastic. So, because the supply of land is fixed and inelastic to price, demand decides who is going to take that land, and demand decide the land use, because supply is fixed and inelastic. If you draw the demand curve here, the quantity of land is fixed, so demand decides the land rent prices. Let's go back to Ricardian land rent. So in this concept, key is the fertility or the productivity. So land with higher productivity will be more expensive. There is a very simple example on this table. You have two pieces of land. The first is land with low fertility. Let's just assume the price of corn is $10 per unit, and this land can produce 2 units. So total revenue is going to be 20. 10 multiplied by 2, 20, which is pretty straightforward. And let's assume that non-land cost is 15. You need to maintain something, non-land cost. Let's assume this is $15. And then you will have leftover, which is $5. So 20 minus $5. So you have a maximum willingness to pay for that piece of land, which is going to be $5. So the bid rent for this land is going to be $5, which is the maximum amount that you can place a bid. So the land rent is going to be decided up to $5 for this land. But the second land with high fertility, they can produce 4 units of corns. So its total revenue is going to be 40, and non-land cost is the same. Then your willingness to pay for this land is $25. So your the highest maximum amount is going to be 25. So the bid rent for this land is 25. That makes a difference, which is the productivity of the land. But now we assume the productivity in the city, across the city, is the same. So we'll move on to the next idea, that the accessibility rather than fertility or productivity. So in this example, land rent is decided by the total revenue minus non-land cost and freight cost, which is the transport cost. Non-land production cost is the same across the city and the region, but freight cost varies. So we have different distances to the central area or the marketplace. Let's assume this is the very center, and 1 kilometer away, 2 kilometers away, 3 kilometers away. Your total revenue is the same, which means productivity of that land is the same. But there's a trade-off relations with freight cost or transport cost, while non-land cost is the constant. It doesn't change over the space. It is the same for all the space. So the productivity is the same across the city and the region. But it's pretty obvious the freight cost varies. In the center, you don't need to transport, so it's going to be 0. But let's just assume the freight cost increase linearly. So at this distance, the freight cost is 20. At 2 kilometers away, 40. And 3 kilometers away, 60. Then you will have the maximum willingness to pay for that land that decreases from 120 to 60 in a linear way. If you draw a graph with the distance and the bid rent, which is willingness to pay for land, it is kind of linear line. So at the center, your willingness to pay for land is the highest. That means land rent is the highest in the center, while in the peripheral areas with greater distance from the center, land rent decreases because of the trade-off relations with transport cost. This is a very basic idea about bid rent curve, but that gives a very clear concept to understand the urban forms and land use. Which bid rent curve shows more expensive transport cost among 1A, B, and C? Yes, C. So that means transport cost is cheaper, which means the slope is more flat. It doesn't change with the distance a lot. So C shows how transport cost is more cheaper than A and B. If you can't understand this one, just leave it for now. And we'll move on to a further advanced reasoning in terms of housing. We'll think of commuting and consumer analysis and price distribution and urban structure. So I will follow the logic described in this chapter, lectures on urban economics. I believe this is the suggested reading this week. So you will conceptualize all your savings and all your spending this way. You have an income, right? And with that income, you will spend housing or non-housing, or, which is pretty straightforward. You have an income, and you will spend housing or non-housing stuff, everything. So on the left side shows that you spend your money on housing and consumption on any other things like food or your entertainment and everything. So that can explain all your income minus transport cost or the commuting cost. So then you will have the disposable income. So you need to commute. You need to spend money on your transport after your income. Then you will have the disposable income. The right side is your disposable income, and left side is your consumption. How about your saving? And where do you want to include your saving on the left side? Probably housing or non-housing stuff. Because why do you save? To spend on housing or non-housing in the future. So you can include your saving here or there. So it is not a matter. And we'll change this one into the equation. So in the housing consumption, it can be explained by the housing price per unit, let's say per square meter, multiplied by the housing price. Housing price per unit multiplied by the space, the square meter. That can explain your housing consumption. So housing price per square meter is pretty common in many countries, but in Australia it is not that common. It is not frequently used, but in office or commercial property, the price per unit, like square meters, is pretty common. So let's say you can have the information about housing price per square meter, and this is the quantity that you are consuming on housing, which is the square meter, the size. And if you multiply this one, you will get the amount that you are spending on housing. And consumption on any other goods are just the amount that you are using on other stuff. And in terms of the transport, you have the cost per unit distance, like per kilometers, how much do you spend. This can include your out-of-pocket money and also your time value. Because if you spend long time to commute, probably your out-of-pocket money is not that high, but you can convert that time into the money in dollar. So that can include out-of-pocket money and the time values. If you multiply the distance to the center, which is x here, you can estimate the transport cost or commuting cost. Next is about equation. Left side is about your consumption. Consumption on any other goods, and P means housing price, Q means the space. So this is on consumption on housing, this is consumption on other stuff, which is the same to your disposable income. Your income minus transport cost. T means the transport cost per distance, and X means the distance to the central area, or the distance to the CBD. And with this one, we will compare the inner city areas with suburban areas. Before we go into that comparison, I'd like to introduce the budget lines and utility functions. You have the fixed amount of your income, so you can spend on housing or non-housing stuff. That's all. So if you spend all of your money on housing, probably you can't spend anything on other goods. But if you spend less on housing, then you can spend some money on other goods. So it is going to be straight line like this. You can have different budget lines if you have different monies. But there's one more thing that we can think of to find out the optimal level that you can maximize your benefit or utility or satisfaction. In general microeconomics, this is called the indifferent curve. That means on this line, your utility is the same. Utility means your level of benefit or level of happiness or level of satisfaction. So if this indifferent curve is higher, your happiness, satisfaction, or utility is higher. But in this line, your level of utility or level of satisfaction, level of happiness is the same. But you want to move up to here because you will have higher utility. So given the budget line, the optimal level of consumption can be decided up to here. So on this indifferent curve of utility, your level of satisfaction is the same, but your budget can allow only up to here. So this is the level, optimal level, that you can maximize your utility. And we'll use this idea into the discussion on housing and non-housing stuff. And you have this indifferent curve of utility. On this indifferent curve, you have the same level of benefits and utility, so no reason to move any other places. And you will compare this point and that point with the budget lines in different preference. Here at Q0 and C0, just have a look at that point, your level of consumption on housing is less than Q1, but your level of consumption on any other goods is higher than Q1 and C1 here. So that point, that Q0 and C0 is likely in inner city areas because you spend more money on non-housing, but your space of housing is smaller. And here, your space of housing is larger, but you spend less money on other goods. With the same budget line, here and there will be their optimal residential choice given the limited budget. So this one is inner city areas, and that one is suburban areas. And now we'll think of the growing distance make a difference in terms of the housing prices. Let's compare the slope of the budget line here and there. The slope in this line is minus P0, which is likely the housing price. And the slope here is the housing price at the suburban areas. Which is more steeper? This one, the steep in inner city areas. That gives us an idea that inner city areas will have higher housing price per unit. We are not talking about the whole housing, but we are talking about housing price per square meter. So by playing with the equation and the graph, we can reach to a couple of conclusions. Firstly, with growing distance from the CBD, the price of housing per unit is going to go down. That means central areas will have higher housing price, which is pretty straightforward to instantly understand. Inner city areas will be more expensive because it has good access to facilities and good access to other amenity and good access to jobs. So transport cost is low. And with the greater distance from the CBD, the size of housing is increasing, which are two major conclusions from this exercise. And when you draw mathematically precisely, the housing price is slowing down in this way. In a very conceptual form, we used straight line, but this is more realistic and this is more a precise form to describe the housing price. At the center, you have more expensive per unit. In the suburban areas, you have less expensive housing price. And let's approach from developer's perspective. And if land rent is expensive in the central areas, what developers do is to make higher buildings because that is expensive land. They have to invest more capital to make a profit. So they will build higher and higher density buildings. And with growing distance from the CBD and building height will fall down. So graphically, we can assume that in a central area with high land rent, more higher buildings, tall buildings will be built, while shorter height and larger dwelling size will be built in the suburban areas. So where is more higher density in terms of population dwellings? In the central areas with higher bid rent. But in the suburban areas with lower bid rent, the rooms will be spacious, the density will be lower. So if you just combine two approaches by consumers and developers, with growing distance from the CBD, prices will drop, the space will be larger, but from the developer's perspective, land rent is going to be lower with growing distance from the CBD, and building heights will be falling down with growing distance. So the density is going to be lower at the suburban areas than inner city areas, which is straightforward. Even without using this equation, that the conclusions are easy to understand. But by doing this, you can conceptually formulate all the flows of logic. And William Alonso's urban bid rent model gives an idea who will take the land. If you have different bid rent curve, different willingness to pay for land rent between commercial land and residential land, who is going to use the land? The highest bidders. If the commercial bid rent curve is like this, and residential bid rent curve is like this, then in that area, commercial use will be dominant, while the suburban, the outer areas, residential land use will be dominant because their willingness to pay for land is higher than commercial areas. And so distance matters in this equation. And here we are talking about a monocentric city model, but if there are polycentric cities, the bid rent curve should be changed and revised. And I would like to add one more element, which is the opportunity cost in this idea. Opportunity cost is a foregone opportunity. For instance, is a rate of return at 5% high or low? You can have 5% benefit or rate of return on your investment on stock. Is that high or low? But you have to compare that rate of return with other options. Like if these banks gives a 7% interest rate, which is guaranteed, probably 5% interest, 5% rate of return is not that high because you can get 7% easily. So this is kind of the opportunity cost. This is a foregone opportunity by investing here, but by investing here you get 5%, but this opportunity cost is like 7%, which is foregone opportunity. So your comparison is not 0%, but which is readily available option. Another example is commuting. You are living currently here, and 1 hour distance from the center, and you spend 1 hour, but you like green space. So you moved out to the suburban, very, very remote suburban areas. So now you need to spend 4 hours. Then you have to spend 3 extra hours for your commuting. But with these 3 hours, you can do something. At least you can take rest on the bed, and you can spend time with your family. You can spend time for any other things. That is the foregone opportunity by moving from here to remote areas. Probably you can enjoy the green space in the remote areas, but you will lose the opportunity for 3 hours to do something else. So what is the opportunity cost on the land use? Probably farming. If the urban land use is not dominant, probably farmers can do farming on the land, on the bare land. So let's say the farmers have a willingness to pay for $20 here, and the urban land users have like this is urban land use, right, for housing or any other things. And with this diagram, with this graph, you can identify the boundary of the city or the size of the cities. So up to X bar here, housing will be located, and outside this X bar, farming will be dominant. If farming is dominant in that area, we don't think that is urban areas. So the boundary of the city is defined up to x bar, which is pretty interesting. By using this bid-rent curve, you can even identify the size of the city from the center to the x bar here. And let's play around this bid-rent curve a bit more. If population increases, what happens is that the demand for land increases across the space, across city and the region. Let's just assume the population distribute across the city and the region. Then bid-rent curve is moving up. That means the size of the city is likely to be expanded from x0 to x1, which is pretty straightforward. If population is increasing, if there is no intervention, people will have higher willingness to pay for all land. Then the size of the city will expand, which is happening in many cities, including Melbourne, including other developing countries. The population is increasing from international migrants by rural to urban migrants, so cities are expanding. And what happens if commuting cost increases? If this can be realized by increasing the tax on the fuel, or if there is a construction work along the metro lines, your commuting cost will increase. It is not about out-of-pocket money, but it's more about your time, because you need to spend more time for your commuting because of the construction or because of the disruption or current existing transport infrastructure. What happens is that people find it's difficult to commute in the suburban areas, so demand in inner city areas will be higher because of these changes. So bid-rent curve will change like this. Then it makes an impact to consolidate to some extent because bid-rent curve moves like this, and the development will be more concentrated in inner city areas. Income increases is another example. What happens if income generally increases? Then people want to live in more spacious rooms, spacious house. So their demand for larger housing will be increased. Then people will like suburban areas because they have more money to spend spacious housing. Their demand for larger housing is increasing. So it makes a change to the bid-rent curve that will be reflected onto urban forms to some extent. And another example is urban growth boundaries. What happens if urban growth boundaries or green belts are set? And I'd like to make a pause, and I will ask you, do you like urban growth boundary, or do you hate urban growth boundary? And 2 weeks ago, the Mauha asked you a question, what is urban growth boundary? And what do you think? Growth boundary is pretty straightforward concept. And this is the city. We want to limit the expansion of the city, because if cities are expanding further and further to outer areas, we need to provide infrastructure. We need to support them. So it's pretty expensive. Let's consolidate, or let's limit the urban expansion by land use regulation. So this is the boundary. Only new development can take place within this boundary. Sometimes people use the green belt. Like this is the city, and there is a belt, green belt. So in this green belt, you can't make any new development. And what is the rationale of this urban growth boundary, and what will happen to the urban growth boundary? Good point. Two good points. You can protect the environment because you will limit the land use conversion outside of the boundary. But another side effect is that you can increase the land rent inside the boundary. Good point. Very good. And any other things?
Increase of density improves the efficiency inside of the city.
Excellent. That is the contemporary approach to consolidate. So you can put inside, so possibly functions and facilities can be nearby, so you can increase the efficiency. You can reduce the distance to core functions like train station, to the center of the city, to the key infrastructure facilities. You can decrease the distance for commuting, so you can improve the efficiency. Excellent. And what else?
To preserve agricultural land.
Yeah, we can preserve the environment and agricultural land. And what else? What happens if there is very high demand for the urban land? The demand for the urban land is very high, but the government doesn't allow outside here. One possible side effect is that this may be more obvious. People can't put a new development project inside. Too expensive and difficult to secure land. What happens in some cities is that they make a new development here, outside the greenbelt, way outer the greenbelt, and there is no job here. So what they do is to commute to the center still. And this is called frog leap development or leapfrog development. They just jump up to outside the greenbelt, which is pretty negative side effect. If this development took place just here, it's not necessary to commute long distance, but because of this greenbelt or because of this policy, and there might be some side effect. There even longer commuting distance, and this happens in some cities and regions. And another issue is that the growth boundary or the greenbelt is set. What happens is that the bid rent curve is physically or by law limited up to here. It doesn't move to x0. It should be moved to x1 because it is regulated. And what happens is that you will increase the land value inside the urban growth boundaries. And can you see the sharp difference up here and there? Just crossing the line, land value changes radically. What happens in that area is that once the government deregulates the growth boundary or release the land supply around here, the landowner will gain windfalls a lot. They will gain a lot because of the sharp difference. The changes of zoning gives you a fortune if you are the landowner living here. So there should be a very strong lobby and request to change here. Because if it is changed, they will gain a lot. This is well described in this week's reading about growth boundaries and changes of growth boundaries and how landowners, mostly farmers, behave in this and perceive these changes in growth boundaries. And also, Malha, about 2 weeks ago, explained that sharp difference across the Buchanan Road. On the left side, there's pretty expensive land, but on the farming land, there's almost nothing. And how about if there is a building height regulation? I'm not going to give you the answer this time, but you will go through different scenarios in your tutorial. But I would like to explain this how to measure the building height by using floor area ratio. In Melbourne, they use floor area ratio now, but in many countries like America and Singapore use the floor area ratio. This is pretty straightforward. We can just give an idea, 1 story or 3 story and 5 story buildings. Then you can have some ideas about the height and the density, but floor area ratio gives a more standardized format. On this land plot, if this is 1 hectare, do you know how big is 1 hectare? 100 meters by 100. So Melbourne CBD is more about 100 hectare. If there is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. Only 1/4 is built and occupied by your building at 1 story. So you use like 0.5 hectare out of 1 hectare. So this is 25. If you convert into percentage, this is 25%. So this is called floor area ratio. On level on the B, land piece B, you use the half, so it's like half hectare out of 1 hectare, so 50%. You can play around this one. Normally in your calculation on floor area ratio, underground space is not normally included in practice. So if you build up 2 stories, then it's going to be 50%. In this example, if you build up 4 stories, it's going to be 100%. So you can estimate how high or how intensity of the land use is likely. But if there is a regulation on the height or density in inner city areas because of heritage reservation, probably bid rent curve is different from the normal shape. So what happens if the current fare system basis on the basis of zone 1 and zone 2, which is pretty weird, to a distance-based system? What will happen to the bid rent curve? So the impact can be found in the urban form to some extent. So just to think of these different scenarios. Thank you. And then you will go through these different scenarios in your tutorial. Land use can be changed by different ways, and I'd like to go through these land use changes after probably in 2 weeks' time, and because we need time to go through some ideas. And after a 5-minute break, Sarah from ABP Library will talk about how to develop your research skills. Because we have just finished the first written assessment, but the second assessment is coming soon, so you need to build up your research skills. And let's have a 5-minute break. Thank you for coming. Do you have a slide or just a talk?
No, I'm just going to go live.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry for the delay. I just did. Yeah.
Running a bit late
It'll be fine. And probably 10 to 20 minutes or 20 minutes, it will be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. After your talk, another speaker will talk about another issue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Cool. I've done my portion. Yeah.
I thought I'd come in and find you doing the plank or something.
It's good. Yeah.
How did they go?
It was pretty good. They just submitted yesterday.
Okay.
This week, Sunday,
Yeah.
and I'm reading the report. It was pretty good. There are always some students asking for extensions.
Yes. Was there any issues that you think I should cover when I'm talking, or?
At the moment, it's pretty basic for the second assessment.
Alright.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
basic.
Just thought I'd go through a little bit
Yeah, excellent. Some students use the references from other countries, including other languages like Chinese. And the question was how can they refer to these non-English materials?
That's a tricky one.
So I replied that you can translate the title and then at the end you can put the bracket in Chinese or in another language.
That's kind of up to you as the marker. I will let Jo know because she'll talk about referencing more when she comes to talk. Because I'm going to just concentrate. We had a chat about this. Thought I'll concentrate more on the research, but tell them they need to keep track of what they're using, and then she'll talk about using those references when they're writing. That's a tricky one with the references in other languages because it can be tricky for the person marking it to check.
And the second assignment is about literature review.
Yep.
That will be more about academic papers and journal papers. And I don't want them to just use news media,
Yes.
government reports, but more academic papers will be preferred. So
Yep. So it's always going to show them scopus
that's good.
studies abstracts and they can limit things down in that. Yep.
Yep. And they have topic areas. I gave like 9 topic areas. They can pick up one of them. So it's looking fine. So you came over last time, so you can once you're ready, just start.
Okay, everyone, I know you've got another speaker coming in after me, so I'll make a start now. So for those of you who may not have met me at the first lecture I came to, my name's Sarah. I'm from the Architecture Library. If you have any questions while you're researching your second assessment, please don't hesitate to come and ask me. That's what I'm here for. So I'm going to show you the Urban Planning Library Guide. I probably showed you that last time. I'll go into a little bit more detail this time about putting together searches for scholarly sources. But if you get stuck and you're having trouble with your assessment, don't wait till it's due. Come and see me soon, and I'm happy to work through looking at search strategies and different ways to search for information if you're struggling. So the Urban Planning Guide puts everything that you need in one spot. So if we go through the library homepage to the subject research guides, has anyone used it already? Couple of people, awesome. So under Architecture, Building and Planning, if we scroll down to the bottom of the list, there's the Urban Planning Guide. My contact details are there, so if you do need to email me, please feel free. So I'm going to concentrate on the databases today, and probably just a couple of them. I'm going to look at Scopus and Urban Studies Abstracts, and I'll also look at Google Scholar. So if we start with Scopus, now the good thing about Scopus is that it only has academic, scholarly journal articles in it. And Min has just told me for your second assessment, he really wants you to concentrate in your literature review on really scholarly sources. So Scopus is a great place to start. It's a multidisciplinary database. Has anyone used it? few of you good. So it covers a lot of different areas. Everything on it is peer reviewed, which means, excuse me, all the journal articles have been read before they're published by experts in the field. So they're quality information. And there's a few ways you can search. You can just do a basic search from here, but you can also build searches, and that's what I want to show you how to do today, because it can give you a little bit more flexibility in your searching. So what I want to look at is, I'm going to look at urban labour markets in Africa. I've decided that's my topic. I was just having a flick through a textbook and that's what came to me. So the first thing to do is, if I'm thinking urban, I might want to think about other words that could also describe urban. So for example, I might also want to include metropolitan in that, because that is another way of describing urban. And you'll notice I'm putting or between each word. That's telling the database that I want urban or metropolitan or, and I'm going to put in cities as well. And I wanted to look in the broadest possible places for this, so I'm looking in the article title, the abstract and the keywords. I could be more specific, just do it in the keywords or the abstracts, but generally this is pretty broad enough. Then I can add a field, excuse me, by clicking the plus, and I want to put in labour market, and I'm putting it in inverted commas to force the database to look for labour and market where they occur right next to each other. So I'm forcing it to be more specific in my searching. And again, I can add another field, and I'm going to put Africa in there because I want it to search for things about the urban labour market in Africa. And if I click search, okay, so I've got 128 documents. I'm pretty happy with that as a set of documents. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's not overwhelmingly huge. And I can start going through those and seeing what's relevant. If I find one that I think is spot on and it's fantastic, what I can do is what I've just scroll over here. I can look at the cited bys. Now at the moment, this list is sorted by date, so I'm getting the newest articles at the top. What I can do is sort it on cited by. So this means I can sort it by the number of times other people have used this research in their research. So if I find a journal article that's really, really good, let's just say this one. It's from 2009, so it's not too old. And it's been cited by 57 other researchers. So if I click on the 57, I have 57 other articles that are related. So very quickly, I'm building up the resources to do my literature review. It's really important that you do actually read these articles to be able to review them. You can view the abstract through Scopus, but the abstract isn't enough. It's going to give you a broad overview of what the article covers, but you're not going to get the central arguments and the real research by just reading the abstract. So I really would encourage you not to do that, but to click on the Find It at UniMelb link and actually go in and look at the article. So in this case, we've got a link here. You can just click on Go for the online product. And again, very usefully, this particular article is giving me links to articles people also read on that particular subject. So again, you can have a look at those articles. You're finding more research without really actually doing any more searching. You're following a trail. We call this like the research trail method of research. The other thing that's really important to do is if I open up, actually we've got a link here. I can open the PDF, but there is a link to the references here. And again, you've got references. So they're on the same topic as the article you're looking at. Another really good way of finding more research. And if it's in a peer-reviewed journal, chances are the references they've used are also from peer-reviewed journals, so you're going to find good quality scholarly information there. The thing to do when you are looking at these articles is to keep track of what you're looking at as you research. Don't sort of just print things out and hope for the best, or read something and make some notes. Keep some sort of record of what you're reading. Whether you're going to use a product like EndNote, is anyone using EndNote? A couple of people. Or you could just keep a spreadsheet, or you can email the records to yourself, but keep a record of what you're reading. Also, when you are writing, keep a record of the page number if you're quoting or paraphrasing, because if you do something like I just did, I've just written an assignment for a course I'm doing. I've done a quote, but I've returned the book and I forgot to put the page number in. So that's a terrible error for a librarian to make. I should have known much better. Learn from my mistake. Make sure you note down all your page numbers when you're doing your research and starting to write, so that at the end when you're doing all your referencing, that information is there. So just keep track of what you're looking at, because it's the worst thing to have your assignment finished, then realise you've got to go back and find all that information again. So that's Scopus. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so the next thing I want to show you, oops, if I go back to here, is if we go back to the guide, again, Urban Studies Abstracts, good database to look at because it only covers urban studies, so you know what you're getting is relevant. Not quite as broad as Scopus. And again, if I put in and here it's giving me some suggestions, so I'm just going to cheat and not do the typing. And again, I'm putting, labour market as a phrase. Okay, in this case you can see my result set is a lot smaller, so I've got 12. That may be enough. And again, I can click on Find It at UniMelb. What I can also do with this database is I can use these subject terms to go and look for further journal articles. So I could just click on, I don't know if it'll work if I right click, no. If I click on urban planning in Africa, I'll get all the articles about urban planning in Africa. There's not many, 6, so I probably would just go through all of those and have a look to see if they are relevant. And again, you've got the abstract here. You can export the records from here. You can email them to yourself. So if you're keeping track of everything, use that function. I won't say too much more about Urban Studies Abstracts. It pretty much works the same way as Google Scholar. It's just useful to know it's there, and it does have these subject terms here. It doesn't have the cited by information that Scopus has, so you might want to start with Scopus. The other database I wanted to talk about very quickly is Google Scholar. And we should have a link to it somewhere here. Okay, so if we go to, I'm hoping this takes me to Google Scholar. If you do it through the library website, you will be linked to the library's holdings. So you can look up Google Scholar in the library catalogue. And what we can do from Google Scholar is similar to searching with Urban Studies Abstracts or Scopus, is you can do an advanced search, which means instead of getting, I don't know, 1 million search results, you may only get 17,000. It's still too many, but Google Scholar is quite useful for a very broad search. So if we did again, I want all of the words Africa in my search. I want the exact phrase labour market. So if I just put all of these into Google Scholar in the normal search, it would just look for all of them anywhere and I'd get too many results. This at least narrows it down a little bit. And if I put in urban, I'll leave out cities for now. I can also limit it to the publication date. So if I just wanted, say, the last 5 years, I'll do 2012 to 2018. And then I can click on search. So you can use Google Scholar to do a bit more sophisticated searching. And you can generally tell if something's going to be an academic journal, it's going to come from one of these where it says Content Taylor and Francis. That's a book, probably wouldn't look at that. The journal articles, if we have access to them, you'll see this Find It at Unimail link next to it, so you can get into our holdings. And again, similar to Scopus, you've got the cited by links here. So this is a really useful way of, again, finding more information. So if I click on cited by 12, there's the 12 articles that have used that research. So again, that's building up your research trail in a very effective way. To keep track of what you're looking for from Google Scholar, if you click on these little inverted commas here, you can cite the article. So I would recommend if you're looking at something from Google Scholar, you can cut and paste this. That's ready to go into your bibliography at the end of your paper, or you can go into the actual, if we go to click on the Find It at Unimail link and go to the journal. You can usually cite it from here. But now I've said that, I can't find the link. Oh, here we go, cite article. And there's, that really just gives you links to export it into a citation manager like EndNote. So I might use the one in Google Scholar if I wasn't using EndNote to cut and paste the citation so it's ready to go into my bibliography. So do that work as you go. If there is an opportunity to cut and paste the citation, keep a Word document, and then all you need to do is put it in alphabetical order and put it at the end. If you're doing a literature review, you'll really need a really good bibliography. So keep that all cut and pasted and then you can organise it. If you need help with referencing, again, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm very happy to help with referencing. I really quite like referencing in a very sad librarian way. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to show you for now. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay. Yep.
How can I find the full text?
The full text?
Yeah.
So in this case, we've got the PDF here. This little box here that I've clicked on, this is the link to the full text. So if I go back to here, if I click on Find It at Unimail, and if it's available in full text, it tells me there's online sources here, and I just click on that link where it says Go, and that will take me to the full text eventually. There we go. So if I scroll down here, there's the link to the PDF. So you just look for a link to a PDF. Again, there's a cite button there, so you could just cut and paste that. I should quickly mention too, when you are cutting and pasting, my colleague from Academic Skills will come and talk to you in a couple of weeks about the writing process, but the library does have, and I'll just reiterate this, a database called Recite, which will help you with citing and referencing. So probably good to just know that that's there in the back of your mind when you're putting together your list of resources as you research. And you can, this is just examples for journal articles. Know that that's what it's supposed to look like. And if you do it as you go and get a feel for it, it's going to be a lot less work right at the end when you're writing up your assessment at, I don't know, 11 o'clock on the night before it's due. Okay, any more questions? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Min. Good luck with your assessments and don't hesitate to contact me, please.
Thank you. turn it off. Yeah, I have yours. Yeah. Yeah,
Some of the slides that may be helpful later on. So,
did you add that?
yeah, just saying. I haven't added more slides. This is I have another presentation which one. So what's that one? Yeah. So for lecture 7?
So,
Yeah, that one.
is that the same?
Yes,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the same one.
It
I'll
looks
just open
good.
it from there because I might use some other slides if they
Yeah.
ask questions.
Yeah. Great.
Perfect.
Okay, we went through some ideas about bid rent curve, and land use can be altered by multiple ways. You can convert from housing to office buildings, from warehouse to housing and office buildings, and infield development, brownfield development, or greenfield development. And there are multiple ways to change the land use. And Malha will address one example about greenfield development, which is to change the land use. And he will give us a pretty practical approaches that he is working on it. So it will be a good opportunity to understand how the developers have different perspectives and different views and the analysis they have to go through. Let's warm welcome Malha.
Morning, everyone. You may recall I gave a talk about a couple of weeks back, and I started the talk with asking everyone to move a seat. You've been in this room for the last 80-odd minutes. I think I'm going to ask you to do that again. I'm very sorry. But I think just to grab your attention, I really am seriously asking you to just move one seat left or right, and I'll start. So, thank you, everyone. What I'm going to focus this last remaining 20-odd minutes of this lecture on will be on a case study of greenfield development. And I'll be talking about the property development process. Now, hopefully this gives you a framework for how investors and businesses think about property development and why that is important as planners. If you see the role of planners, largely they're involved in two realms. One is strategic planning, where planners envision an urban development form for any given area, and they translate that into precinct structure plans, if you like. And then you have the other aspect of planning, which is statutory planning, which is largely an ongoing administrative or monitoring process to evaluate whether what the proposed plans are in line with the structure plans or the vision set out for an area. Okay? I'm going to give you a case study of a project from inception through to completion. And I'll also give you a bit of background on, well, what is property development and its economic fundamentals to the Victorian economy. Just to start off, you may know I've worked for Satterley Property Group. It is Australia's largest residential land developer. These are some of the projects that we have active or in the pipeline in Melbourne. And we've, developed over 100,000 lots since the company was formed about 35 to 40 years ago. Okay. Now, when you talk about property development, a range of activities are included under the umbrella of property development. If you look at residential, you look at greenfield land, you look at medium density housing, you look at apartments. If you look at commercial, you look at office towers. You can look at industrial parks or warehousing complexes. That is included in property development. And then you also have other specialized forms of development, such as hotels, aged care centers, community facilities, and the like, which are included under the umbrella of property development. Now, the Property Council commissioned some research back in 2013 to estimate the contribution of this sector on the Australian economy. And you may be surprised to find out that the contribution of the property sector, or the property development sector, was in fact more than the mining sector to the Australian economy. Okay? So about $182 billion worth of activity at that point in time was undertaken by the property sector throughout Australia. And more than 1 million people, million jobs are directly attributable to the property sector. Now, in Victoria, about $25 billion of that activity took place in 2013, which accounted for about 9% of state economic activity. And of that, $5 billion was in greenfield residential land development. Okay. Now, in Melbourne, just under 40,000 jobs are directly attributable to land development and dwelling construction. So you can see it is a significant part of the Victorian economy. It is also interesting to note that of all the states, over time, dwelling investment in Victoria has been a greater contributor and an increasing contributor to economic activity in the state. Doesn't necessarily mean it's all good, but what it shows is the Victorian economy is greatly benefited or stimulated by dwelling activity, dwelling investment activity. And we saw this slide a couple of weeks back, is that the state government revenues are increasing on the back of property market activity and stamp duties. Okay? So these are big numbers. And in this entire process, you have a range of professionals providing input. It's not just planners and property developers per se, engineers, environmental consultants, state government authorities, cultural heritage consultants. You have legal services, marketing services, finance, all of the likes are impacted and benefited from activity in this sector. Now, I'm going to focus on residential property development and the process of basically converting a farmland into a residential estate or an infill site or dilapidated sites into medium or high density housing. Okay? Now there's 4 key stages to convert what you have is farmland or infill land into residential housing. And it starts with acquisition. Now, property developers as a business rely on the supply of land. It's not like any other business where you go out and purchase your raw inputs every day. Land supply is perfectly inelastic, which means you only have a limited supply of land and developers have to compete to access those sites. And the acquisition process is a part in achieving that goal. Now, to demonstrate this property, this 4-stage property development process, I'll just go through a case study of a project that I'm currently involved in, which is about 25 to 27 kilometers north of the city in Greenvale. Has anyone heard of the suburb of Greenvale? Yep. So that site was purchased from Peat Limited back in 2015, 2016. It can accommodate about 1,300 residential dwellings. And the project is expected to last till about 2022, 2023. Okay? So, now, in order to undertake property development at that site, as a part of the acquisition of that property, we undertook detailed research as to the demand and supply dynamics in the area. Okay? We reviewed the planning controls, such as a precinct structure plan, any infrastructure plans, any contribution plans, and the like. We also looked at market research. And market research was more about, well, which are the key buyer types in that corridor. Now, as planners, you might think there's 2 key buyer types, which are home buyers or first home buyers or investors. But there's one more buyer group which largely gets missed in this, which are upgraders and downsizers. People who already own properties but want to buy a new property, a bigger property or a nicer property. Or you have downsizers who want to buy something a bit smaller as their family circumstances have changed. So we really look to understanding who the market for our product in that area would be. We would then go through the detailed engineering designs and costings to understand, well, what are the cost dynamics for this particular project. You can understand that each and every site has different servicing requirements, different engineering requirements, different development capacities, different environmental constraints. So this process is to identify what some of those costs and those development potential is. And then we would undertake financial modeling to actually estimate, well, how much could we pay for the site? And how much profit we would generate if we acquired the site at that price. As you can see, the acquisition process, we were not the only bidders for this property. There were other parties involved, but we turned out to be the highest bidders. And we acquired the project. Okay? So, now just going into a bit more detail around the demand and supply assessment that we undertook. We looked at a high level, well, what are the population projections for the area? Okay, and this data is available freely from the Victoria and Future population projections. So we look, so Greenvale is in the city of Hume. So we found out that, look, the population in Hume is going to increase from around 200,000 to about 240,000 over the next 10 years. And that will generate demand for around 1,800 to 2,000 dwellings on an annual basis in the area. We looked at Urban Development Program, which is another government released database to look at land supply in the area. And it's very interesting to note, we found out that land supply was in fact diminishing in the area. And after 2016, 2017, you would only have, on average, about 1,000 lots that could be developed in Hume at the time. So we saw that there is a mismatch between demand and supply. So there was a strong fundamental driver for us to say that, look, there are very strong prospects for demand and price growth in this property as a result of the mismatch. Following that demand and supply assessment, we did a thorough review of the planning controls. So we looked at the zoning requirements, we looked at the precinct structure plan, to then identify, well, what is permitted on the site? What do the planning controls say we can develop on the site? Now usually what the planning controls say and allow may be different from what can actually be developed. So we worked with engineers and urban designers to find out, well, what can actually be developed on the site in the realms of what is currently allowed on the site. Okay? So we found out, well, what is allowed and then what can actually be developed on the site. Can we pick up some extra residential yield as a result? Once we got that design done, we undertook detailed market research of, well, what is happening in the area? What is land selling for in this neighborhood for us to estimate revenues for the site? So this project is basically located here. And this is further north as you go from the CBD. So you can notice in Greenvale Gardens, for example, say a 400 square meter block was selling for $260,000 at the time. And if you went further north, a 400 square meter block, the further north you went, reduced to about $220,000 for the site. And that sort of aligns with what you learned about bid rent theory, that largely the further you travel, residents and homeowners want to be compensated for that extra travel, which means land further up you go will have to be discounted at a higher price to attract the buyers there. Okay? So we undertook detailed market research to see, well, what are competitors selling land for in this corridor. Now, based on the work we undertook as a part of the surveying and urban design, and looking at and estimating the revenues that can be generated on a lot-by-lot basis for this property, we went on a stage-by-stage basis and calculated, well, how much is the total revenue we can generate from the site? Does that make sense? Yeah? So we estimated that, look, we can develop about 1,230 or 1,250 lots on the site, and on average, we can generate about $266,000 of revenue from each block of land, on average. Okay? Following that, we did detailed cost studies with the engineers to see, well, what would it cost us to develop the site? Okay, so we talked to landscape architects. We got a landscape budget, so we need to spend just under $10,000 on landscaping. We would have to spend just north of $100,000 on the civil construction works for the site, which is building the roads, the drains, etc. There were significant environmental costs associated with the site. And then we looked at marketing costs. We looked at any upfront infrastructure costs, and we estimated all the costs with that development. Basically applied a profit margin. So we know what the revenues are. We knew what the detailed costs would be. We applied a profit margin, and what was remaining was the land value, which is what we could offer the landowner or the vendor for the site. Okay? So then we calculated, look, if we pay $90 million for this property, we can generate about $30,000 per lot of profit, or a total profit of about $40 million from the life of the project. Okay, so we went through this detailed valuation exercise. Now again, this acquisition process is more an art than a science. Every bidder would come up with a different number based on their assessment and their research on the property and its fundamentals. So we assumed, for example, that we could generate about $266,000 revenue on average from the development potential on the site. some other developer could have undertaken a slightly different study and increased the yield of the development, so built a higher density, but then his revenue realizations would drop because you sell smaller blocks of land for a lesser price. So every developer would have their own view and read of the market and design the product to suit those needs. Now, if you know where Greenvale is and this site, we were of the view that there would be a lot of upgraders and premium homes that would be sold on this estate, which is why we went with a slightly larger lot size at a slightly higher price point. We thought it would be more suitable for this area based on our market research. Okay, so these strategies that we come up during the acquisition process are different. There is no right answer, and they are usually informed by thorough research on market fundamentals and on development costs and our understanding of the planning system. Okay. So we bid 90 million for the site, or 93 million, because there were some other changes post-acquisition. And we were the highest bidder, which is when we secured the site. Okay? Now, once we've secured the site, well, we need to fund the purchase. Okay, so we work with investors to purchase the land, and we had to raise equity of about $40 million to fund this transaction. The rest would be funded by the bank. Okay? It's not that we had to raise all the capital up front. We had to raise the monies over a period of time. I think our last cap call was earlier in January this year. And we would pay for the land in time as well. We did not have to pay the landowners, the vendors, the 90 million up front. It had to be paid on a staged basis. Okay? So we funded the purchase with equity, and once we had all the planning approvals in place, we are now in the process of delivering the project. We've acquired the site, we've funded our acquisition, we are now developing the site. What that largely involves is, firstly, working with council and MPA and the planning authorities to get planning approvals and planning permits for the site. Okay? We then work with engineers and civil contractors to deliver a lot of these works. As you can see, this is a road under construction. To deliver a lot of these works as per the requirements and the planning approvals. Okay, so we need to meet a set standard of construction for all the elements of the development. And you can imagine, well, with the number of stakeholders involved, here, property development, sure, it's a very big money game, but it's also a massive project management exercise of coordinating advice, directions, and inputs from all these professionals to reach an outcome or an output. Okay? So the project delivery or the project management phase tends to be the most challenging because we need to work with external authorities to make sure our proposed project aligns with what is proposed or what is sought by the authorities, and also that what we are producing is in line with what is required for the area. So we need to really have a good read of what the market requires. So for future stages in the development, we can alter our product mix. So for example, if our larger lots are not selling as well as we thought we would, for the next planning permit that we apply on a stage-by-stage basis, we can alter our product mix to meet the needs of the market. Okay, so it's a highly fluid, highly dynamic exercise. And all this we need to ensure that the costs that we incur are in line or less than what we had anticipated during the acquisition phase. Otherwise, that would just blow out our profit margins. Okay? Now, during this phase, you always uncover issues, and they vary on a site-by-site basis. So in this, given the undulating nature of the site, there were a few issues with the rock works and the bulk earthworks that were required, and we had to spend a bit more money making sure that we undertook proper geotech studies and works on the site. And we also had issues with some environmental issues to do with kangaroo management for the site. Okay, this site is not too far from Woodlands Heritage Park. Has anyone been to Woodlands Heritage Park? It's a fantastic place for a day trip. Very nice bushwalks. You get to see lots of kangaroos. I think I went a few months back, I also saw some echidnas there. It's fantastic. A lot of these kangaroos move from this site into Woodlands as they are in close proximity. So we had to make sure we had a kangaroo management plan specific for this site. Okay? And these are issues you only uncover as you are developing the site. And once, and of course we had weather issues which caused delays. And as a part of all this, once the construction is done, we had the sales and settlements on the site, which means that we now deliver the product and collect revenues based on what we had sold to buyers during the development and marketing phase. Okay? I kept it fairly high level. If you have any questions, please let me know. Yes?
What percentage do you have to sell before you start construction?
We are equity and debt funded. We don't have to sell any set percentage. We like to have pre-sales of maybe, let's say, 30 or 40 lots, just maybe one stage. That's it. We don't sell any more. Yeah. One of the reasons why we don't sell anymore is we get our planning permits on a stage-by-stage basis. So we don't want to sell a product for which we don't have a planning permit for. And our funding requirements, unlike apartment developers, are very different. So we don't need to have a set number of pre-sales. The amount of equity that we raise, we are in our own control of the destiny. We don't need to sell to secure funding for the development. Yes?
What was the growth area infrastructure contribution?
For the site, it only applied to part of the site. I think we did not pay the 110,000. It's because the site was brought into the UGB before 2005. So I think we paid a lower rate, about 98,000 a hectare at that time. Yeah. Yes.
What about social infrastructure? Were there any sort of population triggers that you put in place?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So when we purchased the site, the vendors, Peak Limited, which is a public listed development company, they already had committed to building, I think, some ovals and sports fields as a part of this project. So we basically took over that contract to deliver the works in line with what was committed by the vendor and what was required by the PSP. So this site has about 10 hectares of open space, including active sports fields on the site. And when it comes to things such as social and community infrastructure, during the acquisition phase, if we already have a PSP on the site, in this case we did, we always go and talk to council to identify if they need any works done up front. So we don't get caught up during the planning permit phase after we have acquired the site. And then council tells us, no, you need to deliver these works. So as a part of that due diligence process in the acquisition phase, we would uncover and identify all the works that would be required. See, hopefully by now you understand that as developers, we really, it is of little benefit to us to not deliver any infrastructure, okay? It makes our projects more marketable, and we are willing to deliver that, provided that we have that certainty up front that this is what the works are that are required. So we can factor that cost in as a part of our development costs and bid accordingly for the land. If we were told by council after we acquired the site, after we paid the $90 million, that, oh no, you need to build these services and they cost $10 million, we'd be like, oh, what the fuck? Had we known that, we would just have reduced our land price and offered a lower bid. So from a planning point of view, if you have policy which gives investors and developers that certainty, even if it's a cost burden, it can be managed. And that's a real challenge for planning, is to really have that long-term framework and view of, well, what is required in an area, and making sure that you have the processes in place to recover and deliver that infrastructure.
Would you say that certainty was there
On this site, yes. On this site.
Is it there on all?
No, it's not. Usually when we go long on property, so this was a trading project already. When we buy sites, if they are 5-7 years out, usually they may or may not have a precinct structure plan on it. In which case we would have a risk-adjusted premium to our returns, hoping for a higher margin.
And what's the, so what would that premium mean? Can you give an idea?
Look, it varies from site to site. Without giving too many details, we bought sites at about under 15 internal rate of return.
Right, that's the more certain ones.
Yep, and where we don't have that, we can go up to about 17 to 18. So our risk premium varies based on the site and the development context.
And does that vary from council to council, or would you say it's more on that particular piece of land?
Yeah, it's more on a piece of land. Usually, look, we know what the PSP risk and what the timing risk is. I think the good thing the state government has done is get VPA involved, and they are leading a lot of these precinct structure planning processes, which is more standardized than what used to be the case across the different local government areas. So I think so there is a bit more certainty for the development industry to the approach and the timing that can be required. There's always a risk about timing, which impacts project returns, but otherwise, largely, the supply response and the way property is managed and developed in Victoria is actually pretty good. We are a national business. We are. I mean, I buy land in Queensland as well. And the Victorian process is pretty good. It gives developers that certainty, or as much as certainty as we can get, for us to undertake some of these works. Yeah. Yes.
Just ask a question about the Donnybrook site. As far as I know, that's near a rail station, but it's not electrified. So if there's uncertainty about those sorts of transport issues,
Yeah.
for example, if you had a train there, it could take some optimating a transport route design possible, possibly increasing the use of Chandler apartments, for example.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of uncertainty, for example. So
Yeah. Let me cut you on that. There's never going to be apartments on that site. Just one point. Even if there's a rail station, this is 40 k's out from the city. If someone wants to live in an apartment, they'd live probably in Brunswick or Coburg. No one would travel 40 k's north to live in an apartment. This doesn't make sense. The key uncertainty with that Donnybrook site is that the PSP is not approved yet. We secured it on terms that we would pay the landowner once the PSP will be approved, so we are relatively risk-free from that end, but the PSP is not approved yet, and it's unlikely that it'll be approved sometime this year. We were hoping it would get approved this year, but it will get delayed. But that's a risk that we really don't bear because we don't pay for the site until then. So I think that's the key risk with the Donnybrook site. And your comment about electrification, I think us as developers, maybe we should have a view, and we always try to advocate for more investment in infrastructure, but that is beyond our control as to when that comes. Do you guys find anything interesting in this? Any anomalies? No? Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
I found it very interesting and relevant when you can closely relate to the bid rent theory and the land values with how developers work on a daily basis. And next week there will be no lecture, no tutorial. Don't come to the classroom here next week. And the week after, we'll go through the issues about housing. And there is also the continuation of the bid rent curve and land market. And see you in 2 weeks' time. Great. Yeah, thanks so much. Does it make sense? Absolutely. Very helpful. And it's a planner, design. It's good to understand how developers work.
Yeah.
They need to control anyway the developers. They need to work with developers. Finally, developers will change the world.
That's right. Yeah. So they deliver. That's right. It's good. Have you been here, man?
Yeah, that's great.
Good.
It's pretty busy.
So you have a break tomorrow? Oh, next week?
Next week, a little lecture, which is good.
Yeah.
We're already week 7.
Yeah. Very quick.
Yeah, we have no lecture. 8, 9, 10, 11. It's
Yeah.
almost the end of the semester. And now I'm preparing for the intensive, which is
Yeah.
Japan.
Or the. So when are you going to Japan?
Late June.
Okay.
Early July, we'll go to South Korea.
Yeah.
So
Oh, nice.
I think 2 weeks are too much.
Yeah. Oh, it's too much traveling, is it?
Too much for preparation. Admin things. Interesting. So, will you go to your office now?
Yeah, we have a bid due this afternoon.
This afternoon.
Which is why I just got late. Like I was at work at 7:30 in the morning.